The morning was stressful, and George needed to get out of the office. He waited impatiently for his friend John to finish up his work so they could go for lunch. They left the office building a few minutes later and stopped at a hot dog vendor down the street. After they got their food, they planned to go to a nearby park, have their lunch, and hang out until it was time to return to work. As George waited for his hot dog to finish cooking, he absently took in his surroundings. Off to the right, he saw an elderly woman standing at the curb, waiting for the traffic lights to change. There was nothing unusual about the scene, but then everything changed. A young man in a hoodie suddenly rushed at her and tried to snatch her purse. George forgot about his lunch. "Hey!" he shouted as he ran to the woman's aid. At seeing his approach, the thief panicked. He yanked harder at the purse and broke the strap. He then shoved the lady into oncoming traffic before making his escape. Time seemed to stand still as George saw a car slammed into the frail woman, throwing her into the air. A terrible scream soon filled the air as the car screeched to a halt. In the next moment, the woman lay motionless on the ground. George ran to check on the woman and barely noticed that his friend had raced after the thief. His immediate concern was to determine whether she was conscious. "Are you okay?" he asked loudly. He held his breath as he waited for her response. After a second or two, she moaned, and then in a weak voice, she said, "I don't know." George felt relieved when he heard her voice. He asked her a succession of questions, but her answers made no sense. A woman from a nearby salon rushed over with a towel. Since he had left his phone at the office, he asked her to call an ambulance. While the bystander called for help, George rolled up the towel and set it underneath the injured woman's head. She had taken a hard hit, and he didn't dare move her in case she sustained broken bones. Several minutes passed before John returned. His face was flushed, and he was out of breath. "I couldn't catch the thief," he said. They waited with the injured woman for another 30 minutes before help finally arrived. The police then questioned them about the incident, and the woman was taken away by ambulance. By the time George returned to the office, the memories of the event struck him with full force. He couldn't get the old woman out of his mind, and every time he tried to concentrate on his computer screen, her horrible screams rang in his brain. Over and over, he saw the car striking her body, and the criminal who started this trauma had gotten away. When George returned home from work, he called the hospital to check up on the lady. Unfortunately, he was unable to track her down since he didn't know her name. He decided to flip on his local news channel to see if anything would be reported there. But instead of finding more details about the incident, he learned about other horrendous crimes in the city. Still, he couldn't shake off the awful event. After all, he had witnessed an attack on an elderly person, and in broad daylight. How could the vulnerable members of society stay safe in a city ridden with crime? Over the next few days, this question haunted him. His news feed was filled with stories of attacks and criminal activity. His heart ached, and he wondered about the state of the world. He didn't understand the sickening stories of what people did to animals or to other humans. His line of thought led him down a dark path. His feelings of hopelessness, disappointment, and frustration spiraled into depression. Everything seemed so messed up, and everyone online and in person appeared rude and mean. The casual cruelty and brutality he read about made him lose his appetite and kept him awake at night. But every day George had to go through the motions and drag himself to work. "You know, you look like a mess," John told him one afternoon. "Maybe you should take some time off." George liked the idea and asked for a leave of absence. The memories of that day still bothered him, and he hoped the time away from work would help him get over the trauma he witnessed. A week passed, and John came to visit him. "Look at this," he said, showing him a newspaper article. "This is the woman who was mugged." George learned that her name was June. The article spoke about the difficulties she faced after her attack. She had sustained extensive injuries to her hip and back, but she was on the mend and was taking self-defense classes in order to empower herself. Reading the story should have been enough, but for some reason he needed to reach out to her. Armed with the name of the self-defense organization mentioned in the article, George tracked June down and arranged to meet with her at a coffee shop. On the day of the meeting, George walked through the doors of the coffee shop and immediately recognized her. June was laughing and joking with her companion. She seemed so vibrant and alive, and it was difficult to see that this was the same person who was lying motionless on the street. He approached the table and her smile brightened even more. She gave him a hug and introduced him to her friend who owned the self-defense school. "I never got to thank you properly for your help," June said. "I'm glad you're okay," George said, taking his seat. "What happened to you was terrible." "It was bad," she admitted, "but it happened, and it doesn't help or make my life easier if I dwell on it. I have to keep moving forward and live my life." Her optimism struck him and left him in awe. If their roles were reversed, he wouldn't be as accepting or as optimistic. "It's what you take from the situation," June continued. "People like you make the world a better place. You saw a stranger in need of help, and you gave it without thought. And because of your selflessness, you've restored my faith in humanity." The sincerity in her words lifted his spirits. Here was a person who went through a terrible ordeal, yet she was unaffected by the ugliness. He was glad he followed his instincts to meet with June. By witnessing her joie de vivre, he was able to get closure and put the awful memories of that day to rest. But he was aware that it was more than that. Until now, he never realized that he had influence over anyone. It was true that there were bad things in the world, but he didn't need to dwell on them. Instead, he could continue to be a good person, help others, and do his part in making the world a little bit better. What did you guys think of the story? Please comment in the comment section below. I can't wait to read your answers and discussions. Thanks for watching! And don't forget to like and subscribe to get the latest stories to warm your heart. Until next time, bye!